Hey everybody, this is Mr. Storm. In this video, we're going to talk about objects. Now, objects mean something very specific in computer programming. An object is essentially just a piece of a collection of data, if you will. And an object can be a collection of any kind of data that you want to collect within that object. You can store all that data inside the object, and then you can pull out individual data by calling the object by its name. Now, object-oriented programming is a much richer subject than what we're going to get into in this week. And we may not even touch it too much more for the rest of this class. If you want to take more advanced object-oriented programming courses, you can definitely find those at the college level. Today we're going to build very simple objects in our JavaScript pages. I don't want to get too advanced. So a car. Think about an object like a car, right? Every car has certain properties, data, that are attached to that specific car, right? So for example, if I created an object called car and I loaded in some data, for example, its name, and I called this particular instance of that object Fiat, the model 500, the weight, and the color, then if I created an object that stored that data, then I could create instances of that object with all kinds of different attributes, right? For example, if I created a new car, a new version of this car object, its name may not be Fiat anymore. Maybe it's Chevrolet, or maybe it's a model instead of being a 500. Maybe it's a Volt, right? Chevy Volt, right? So we can change the information based on the exact instance of the object that we're using. Hopefully this isn't too confusing yet. Now, we can also store some methods or functions inside of the object, meaning we can have an object that has some functions inside of it, and we can call those functions out of the object and perform those functions on the object itself. For example, a car would have a function called start, which would start the car, or drive, or brake, or stop, things like that. Now, we are going to be creating a function inside of an object, but it's going to be very simple. We're going to create a very simple function. Okay, let's talk about how to define an object. So it's really actually pretty easy. You just create a var, you just use the var keyword, give it a name, and then inside of the brackets here, you just put the first, you want to put the category, right? We'll call it category here. And then the actual value of that category. Remember, spaces and line breaks aren't important, so you can actually do it like this. This is how I do it. But remember, if you're doing it like this, make sure you keep the semicolon at the end of make sure you don't forget the semicolon at the end of the last bracket. I do it like this just to keep it a little bit more, straight in my brain. So once we have an object, we can actually identify and pull out information from that object by typing the object name itself, dot, and then whatever the property name is or the category that we're trying to access. So we can say, I want to, I want to change the inner HTML of a paragraph element, and that change is going to be equal to car.name, which would be Fiat. It would put Fiat on the screen. We can also indicate by brackets as well, but I always do it by the period. So we can also create a function inside of an object. So for example, here we have a person, right? And the first name is John, last name is Doe, ID is 5566. I don't know what the ID is. Maybe they're storing him inside of a database or something. And let's say they create this full name function and they want to return first name plus, with a space, plus this dot last name. Now notice the this keyword here. This refers to specifically this object. So if you use this, the this keyword, whatever you're using it for, it's going to look directly in the thing that it's contained in right there. And if it can't find it, it'll ignore your statement, or it'll throw an error into the compiler, whatever, right? So this means look for the owner of that particular statement. Now we have to, if we are accessing a function, remember to put the parentheses after the function access. So if we want name equals person.fullname, which would be this function up here, which would return this value, we want to make sure we indicate it with the open and close parentheses. If without that, it's going to output the statement itself, and you don't want that. It looks weird. All right, that's about it for objects. Let's talk about the scope. So scope is something, again, that's a little bit more of a higher level kind of concept that it will take a long time for you to figure out. And you know, it's something that people still struggle with even if they've been programming for a while. But very generally, here's what scope means. So JavaScript has two levels of scope, right? There's local scope and global scope. So here's how this works. If you declare a variable inside of a function, then that variable is only accessible by the function it's declared in, okay? So if I declare a variable inside of a new function, that variable can only be accessed inside that function. If I try to call that variable outside of the function, it won't actually work. I cannot use that code. I can't use that variable outside of that function. Now, if we create our variables at the top of the program outside of any functions that we've created, then every function inside my program can use that variable. That is called a global variable, okay? So make sure you're not creating variables inside of functions and then trying to access them from other functions. That doesn't work. Now, objects, functions created inside of objects and variables inside of objects can always be accessed by typing the object name dot, then whatever function, whatever variable you're looking for. Okay, let's see. All right, that's pretty much it for this lesson. Let's go into Replit real quick. I want to show you kind of how to write this really quickly. So I'm going to go ahead and sign in, and let's create a new HTML5 CSS JavaScript page. And let's get rid of the stuff we don't need. Oh, not all that. Okay. Now on the body, I'm just going to include a paragraph element, and I'm going to indicate it has an ID of actor. Okay. Okay, and then we're going to access, I'm going to create a script section down here. And in here, we're just going to start creating, let's create our object here. So we would want to type the keyword var, we'll call it actor. And then the first piece of data in actor, we'll say first name, and let's do Robert. Last name, Downey Jr. Looks good to me. Oh, and you know what? We actually don't want semicolons here. We want these to be commas because we're separating data that's going into the object. What's another attribute we could have for, oh, age. Sure, we'll do age. 55, I believe. I believe he's 55. I could look it up, but I think he's 55. Okay, then we're going to create, let's do the full name example. So full name, and so to create a new function inside of a, to create a function inside of an object, you just indicate the name of the category that function is going to be stored in, and then you start it with the function keyword. Now inside of there, we're going to return, because we just want to, all we want this function to do is return the last, or the first name plus the last name. Now we're going to use the this keyword because we're accessing data inside of this object, right? So this and first name plus space plus this dot last name. Pretty easy. Okay. And that's it for this object. So now we have an actor object in our program. Dot get element by ID, and the ID is actor. Sorry. Dot inner HTML. Oh no, that needs to be HTML equals. So then we want to call the actor object, actor dot full name. So if we did that correctly, let's put in our end tag for our script. If we did that correctly, then when we run this, we should see Robert Downey Jr. on the screen, okay? Let's go ahead and give it a shot. Uh-oh, there's an error somewhere. I made an issue. There's an error. At line 13, we are unexpected token. Oh, I forgot my equals sign up here. Var actor equals, and then I got to a little carried away, but that's okay. It's good to see how to troubleshoot stuff. So line 13 was the offender, and it was that equal sign. Okay, now it works. So we've created an object, and we can grab information out of that object whenever we want. So for example, I can change the inner HTML to age instead. But I have to indicate that I'm talking about the object dot, so actor dot age 55. So that's how we use objects. All right, objects can be very, very helpful for storing specific kinds of information. Now, the way you would use an object is if you had an application like maybe a video game or something, and you wanted to create an enemy object. Well, you can create the object, and then whenever you can instantiate a version of that object by giving it information and then using that information to do whatever it is you're going to do with that enemy. Not every enemy needs to be the same, but all enemies have roughly the same properties, right? And so that's a way you can use objects. And we're going to dig a little deeper into this a little bit later, but for the most part, if you can just do this, then you're good to go for the week. All right. Let me know if you have any questions or concerns, and good luck. Have fun.